when Lieutenant Kira Velnth of the Thraxian diplomatic corps agreed to attend what her human partner called movie night. She never imagined she'd end up preventing an interstellar incident over a kitchen appliance that turned corn into edible clouds. But there she was at 2,300 hours, watching three juvenile Kreshtar predators bow repeatedly before Marcus Webb's vintage popcorn maker while chanting in their guttural native tongue. Marcus had seemed so confident that morning when he'd pitched the idea during their shift aboard the diplomatic station Harmony's Gate, his warm brown eyes sparkling with that peculiar human enthusiasm she'd come to find both endearing and slightly terrifying. Explaining how movie night was an essential human bonding ritual that could help smooth over the tense negotiations between the Kreshtar hunting clans and the Terran Federation. "It's perfect," he'd said, running his hand through his perpetually messy dark hair. "Casual, non-threatening. Just films and snacks," and she'd agreed, despite her better judgment, because she'd been working alongside Marcus for 6 months now and had developed what her fellow Thraxians called a concerning attachment to the human's ridiculous optimism. She should have known better. She definitely should have known better when Marcus mentioned inviting Ambassador Kret's 3 younglings as a cultural exchange opportunity. Now, standing in Marcus's cramped quarters, with her pointed ears twitching in agitation, her silver hair practically glowing with the bioluminescent stress response unique to her species, Kira watched the situation spiral into chaos with the inevitability of a collapsing star. The eldest cub, barely reaching Kira's shoulder, had draped what appeared to be Marcus's vintage Star Wars blanket over the popcorn machine like ceremonial cloth, while the 2 smaller cubs arranged half-eaten pieces of popcorn in geometric patterns on the floor, their razor-sharp claws surprisingly delicate as they worked. "Marcus," Kira hissed, her accent sharpening the consonants in that way that only emerged when she was stressed. "What exactly did you tell them about the popcorn machine?" Marcus stood frozen by his small kitchenette, holding a bowl of now irrelevant candy, his expression somewhere between horrified and fascinated. "I just said it was a special machine that transforms things," he whispered back, his voice cracking slightly. "I was trying to explain how kernels pop. I thought it would be educational." Kira closed her eyes and counted to 10 in 3 different languages, a meditation technique that had saved her career more times than she could count. The Kreshtar were a proud warrior species, their entire culture built around the concept of transformation through trial, particularly the sacred passage from youth to hunter. And here was Marcus, wonderful, brilliant, absolutely oblivious. Marcus accidentally tapping into their deepest spiritual beliefs with a 70-year-old kitchen appliance. "The machine reveals hidden potential," the eldest cub, Thrax, suddenly announced in heavily accented standard, his yellow eyes gleaming in the dim lighting. Marcus had set for movie ambience, his scaled crest rising in what Kira's diplomatic training recognized as religious fervor. "It transforms the weak into the mighty, the small into the great. It shows the truth of what lies within." Oh, stars. This was worse than she thought. Kira's mind raced through her options with the speed that made Thraxians excellent diplomats, their enhanced neural processing allowing them to calculate social outcomes like computers running probability algorithms, and every scenario ended in disaster. If she dismissed the cub's belief, she'd insult their spiritual experience and potentially damage the fragile peace talks that had taken 3 years to arrange. If she encouraged it, she'd be responsible for starting a new religious movement based on a fundamental misunderstanding of human food preparation technology. She could feel Marcus's eyes on her, that look he got when he was out of his depth and trusting her to find the solution. The same look he'd given her during the Andorian flower incident, the plasma conduit misunderstanding, and the unfortunate situation with the ambassador's ceremonial hat. "Kira," he said softly, and there was something in the way he said her name, a warmth and confidence that made her stomach do that strange fluttering thing she'd been trying to ignore for 2 months now. "You've got this." She wanted to tell him that. No, she absolutely did not got this, that this was beyond even her considerable diplomatic skills. But the smallest cub chose that moment to look up at her with those enormous predatory eyes that somehow managed to look innocent despite belonging to a species that could tear through steel plating. And she felt her resolve crystallize into something resembling a plan. "Honored young hunters," Kira said, dropping into the formal register of Kreshtar dialect she'd spent months perfecting, her melodic Thraxian accent actually helping with the complex tonal requirements. And all three cubs immediately snapped to attention. Because Kreshtar younglings were trained from birth to respond to proper protocol. You have witnessed something remarkable tonight. She moved closer, her fitted tactical pants and sleek silver top catching the light, her movements deliberately graceful in the way that put other species at ease. A trick every Thraxian learned in their first diplomatic course. The human Marcus has shared with you a demonstration of transformation. This is true, but do you understand the full lesson? Thrax's crest flattened slightly in uncertainty, his confidence wavering, and Kira pressed her advantage. The machine alone is not sacred, she continued, and she could feel Marcus tense behind her, probably worried she was about to cause an incident. But she forged ahead, trusting her instincts. The machine is merely a tool. What is sacred is the intention behind its use. Marcus did not create this transformation to demonstrate power. He did it to create something to share, to bring people together, to turn a simple seed into something that brings joy. That is the lesson. Transformation in service of community. The words hung in the air for a long moment, and Kira held her breath, her enhanced hearing picking up the elevated rhythm of Marcus's heartbeat, the subtle shift in the cub's breathing patterns, the distant hum of the station's life support systems, all of it crystallizing into this single moment that would either save the evening or end her career. Thrak tilted his head. A gesture Kira had learned indicated deep thought in young Kreshtar, his claws tapping against the floor in a rhythmic pattern that might have been anxiety or consideration. The human shares his transformation magic freely, he said slowly, processing this new framework. This is honorable. The middle cub, Shara, suddenly chirped up, her voice higher and more excited. Is this why humans gather for the movie night ritual? To share transformations together? Kira felt a smile tugging at her lips despite the stress, because the cub wasn't entirely wrong, and she glanced back at Marcus, who was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Something soft and amazed and entirely too dangerous for her carefully maintained professional boundaries. Yes, Marcus said, stepping forward, and Kira was impressed that he'd caught onto her thread. Following her lead, movie night is about sharing experiences. The popcorn, the films, they're just ways to bring people together, to show different perspectives, different transformations. He knelt down to the cub's level, and Kira's heart did that stupid fluttering thing again, because, of course, he was naturally good with children. Of course, he had that gentle patience that made even predatory younglings relax. Of course, he was making this infinitely harder for her to maintain professional distance. I'd be honored if you'd help me understand your culture better, Marcus continued, his voice sincere. Maybe you could tell me about Kreshtar transformation rituals while we watch the movie? Cultural exchange goes both ways. The cubs exchanged glances, having one of those silent conversations that younglings seem capable of across all species. And then Thrak carefully removed the Star Wars blanket from the popcorn machine, folding it with surprising reverence. We will share our stories, he agreed formally, and learn the human way of transformation through community. This is acceptable. Kira let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding, her shoulders dropping as the tension drained from her frame, and she caught Marcus's eye, seeing her own relief mirrored there along with something else, something that made her luminescent skin glow just a bit brighter. The smallest cub, who hadn't spoken yet, suddenly tugged on Kira's pant leg with one careful claw, looking up at her with those enormous eyes. Teacher Kira, the cub said in a tiny voice, can we still eat the transformed corn? It tastes very good, despite everything, despite the stress and the near disaster and the complicated feelings. She was desperately trying to compartmentalize. Kira laughed, a genuine sound of delight that rang through the small quarters like music. Yes, little hunter, she said warmly, reaching down to gently pat the cub's scaled head in the way she'd learned was acceptable. That's exactly what it's for. The movie night resumed with a new dynamic. The cubs settling onto the floor cushions Marcus had optimistically arranged. Their attention split between the screen showing The Lion King, Marcus's choice, because apparently he had no sense of self-preservation, showing a movie about predators and succession to literal predator cubs and their detailed explanations of Kreshtar coming-of-age rituals. Kira found herself wedged on Marcus's small couch beside him, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, close enough that every accidental brush of their arms sent little sparks of awareness through her nervous system. You were amazing, Marcus whispered during a quiet scene, his voice pitched low, so only her sensitive ears would catch it, and she turned to find him looking at her instead of the screen, his expression open and sincere in the flickering light. The way you redirected their interpretation, found common ground. I would have just panicked and probably made it worse. Kira felt heat rising in her cheeks, her bioluminescence probably giving away her flustered state. But the darkness of the movie setting provided some cover. You would have found a solution, she whispered back, meaning it. You always do. You just take a more chaotic route than I prefer. His laugh was quiet but genuine, and she felt it more than heard it. A rumble that did absolutely nothing to help her maintain her professional composure. Can I tell you something? Marcus asked, and there was a nervous edge to his voice now that made Kira's enhanced hearing pick up the acceleration of his pulse, the slight catch in his breathing. Of course, she replied, trying to keep her own voice steady, trying to ignore the way the youngest cub had started to doze against her leg, trusting and innocent, trying not to think about how domestic this whole scene was, how dangerously comfortable she felt here. This wasn't actually about the negotiations, Marcus admitted, and Kira's eyes widened, turning to look at him fully, finding him already watching her with those warm brown eyes that had become far too important to her equilibrium. I mean, yes, cultural exchange is good, and the cubs are the ambassador's children, so it doesn't hurt. But honestly, I just wanted to spend time with you outside of work. I wanted to share something I love with someone. He cut himself off, seeming to realize what he was about to say, and the air between them suddenly felt charged with possibility and terror in equal measure. Someone? You what? Kira heard herself ask, her diplomatic training warring with her personal desires, knowing she should let it drop, knowing she should maintain boundaries. But apparently her mouth had other ideas. Someone I care about, Marcus finished quietly. And there it was, the admission, hanging between them like a fragile thing. Beautiful and terrifying. Someone who makes every shift better just by being there. Someone who's brilliant and compassionate and can diffuse interstellar incidents with kitchen appliances. Someone who glows when she's happy. And it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Kira's mind went blank. All her diplomatic training, all her carefully constructed professional walls, completely useless in the face of Marcus Webb's earnest confession. Marcus, she started, not even sure what she was going to say. But Thrak chose that moment to ask a very loud question about whether Mufasa's death counted as an honorable transformation. And the moment shattered into the practical needs of explaining Disney movie plot points to predatory aliens. But Marcus's hand found hers in the darkness between them, his fingers intertwining with hers, warm and solid and real, and Kira squeezed back. A silent acknowledgement of something she wasn't quite ready to name, but couldn't deny. And they stayed that way through the rest of the movie, connected in the flickering light. While lion cubs and predator cubs alike learned about circles of life, the movie ended to mixed reviews. The cubs uncertain about the sad transformation of Mufasa, but enthusiastic about Simba's eventual triumph. And Kira found herself helping Marcus clean up popcorn kernels from impossible crevices, while the younglings carefully packed up the geometric patterns they'd made, wanting to show their father their community transformation art. So, Marcus said as he walked the cubs to the door, having contacted Ambassador Kruth's attendant for pickup, same time next week, I'm thinking we try introducing them to animation, maybe How to Train Your Dragon. Thrak's eyes lit up at the word dragon, and Kira groaned, already imagining the diplomatic incidents that could spawn from that particular choice. We will return, Thrak announced formally, then ruined the dignified effect by adding enthusiastically. The transformation corn is excellent, and teacher Kira's stories are wise. And human Marcus is very funny, even when he does not mean to be. Marcus laughed, not at all offended, and ruffled the cub's crest in a gesture that should have been offensive but somehow came across as affectionate. Because somehow Marcus had managed to bond with the cubs of one of the galaxy's most fearsome predatory species over popcorn and Disney movies. Because, of course, he had, after the cubs left. The quarters felt suddenly quiet and too small. Just Kira and Marcus and the elephant in the room. Except the elephant was the confession he'd made, and the fact that her hand still tingled from holding his. I should go, Kira said, but she didn't move, standing in the middle of his living space, with her silver hair catching the light, her heart rate elevated, her bioluminescence probably betraying every emotion she was trying to hide. You should, Marcus agreed, but he didn't move either, leaning against the doorframe, watching her with those eyes that saw too much. But I hope you won't, not yet. I think we need to talk about what I said. Kira's diplomatic instincts screamed at her to deflect, to make a graceful exit, to maintain professional boundaries. But she was so tired of boundaries, so tired of pretending that working alongside Marcus was just a job, that his smile didn't make her day, that she hadn't been finding excuses to extend their shifts together. What you said, she started carefully, her accent thickening with emotion. About caring about someone, was that someone me? Or was I projecting? Because I've been trying very hard not to care about you beyond professional courtesy and failing spectacularly. Marcus's expression transformed, hope and joy and relief flooding his features, and he crossed the small space between them into strides, close enough that she could count the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, close enough that her enhanced senses were overwhelmed by everything that was uniquely him. It's you, he said simply. It's been you since you talked down that Andorian trade delegate by quoting their own poetry back to them. It's been you since you laughed at my terrible jokes during the overnight shift when the station lost gravity. It's been you since you stayed up helping me write that report, even though it wasn't your responsibility. It's always been you, Kira. Her name on his lips sounded like something precious, and Kira felt her carefully constructed control crumbling, felt herself leaning into this dangerous, wonderful possibility. This is complicated, she whispered, but her hand came up to rest against his chest, feeling his heartbeat racing under her palm. Relationships between diplomatic corps members, especially different species, the regulations, the complications. Marcus covered her hand with his, warm and gentle, his thumb tracing patterns on her luminescent skin. I know, he said softly, and if you want to maintain professional distance, I'll respect that. I'll never mention this again, and we can pretend I didn't completely break protocol. But if there's any chance you feel the same way, then maybe the complications are worth it. Kira thought about regulations and protocols, about the careful distance she'd maintained from every colleague, every assignment, about the loneliness of always being professional, always being perfect, always being the one who fixed problems instead of creating them. And then she thought about Marcus's laugh, his kindness, the way he'd looked at her in the darkness, the way his hand felt in hers, and she made a decision that had nothing to do with diplomacy and everything to do with the heart she'd been trying to ignore. I feel the same way, she admitted, and saying it out loud felt like stepping off a cliff. Terrifying and exhilarating. I have been trying not to feel the same way. I have been very professional about not feeling the same way. I have been failing completely, because apparently you are impossible not to care about. Marcus Webb. His smile could have lit the entire station, bright and genuine and absolutely devastating to her composure. And when he slowly, carefully, giving her every opportunity to pull away, leaned down to rest his forehead against hers, a gesture of intimacy that transcended species, Kira let herself have this moment. This perfect, complicated, wonderful moment. So we're doing this? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. We're actually doing this? Kira smiled, feeling the bioluminescence in her skin pulse in rhythm with her happiness, creating patterns she couldn't control and didn't want to. We are doing this, she confirmed. Though we are going to have so much paperwork to file with HR, you have no idea, Marcus laughed, the sound reverberating through both of them where they stood pressed together. And Kira felt something in her chest unfurl, something that had been locked away behind duty and protocol and fear. They stood that way for a long moment, forehead to forehead, hands clasped, breathing in sync. And Kira marveled at how right it felt, how natural. Despite every regulation that said interspecies relationships were complicated, despite every logical argument against mixing personal and professional lives, this felt like the least complicated thing she'd done in years. For the record, Marcus said, pulling back just enough to meet her eyes, mischief dancing in his expression. I'm blaming you if the Cubs start a religious movement around my popcorn machine. You're the one who called it sacred transformation. Kira laughed, bright and free, swatting his shoulder with her free hand, while the other remained firmly clasped in his. I was preventing an interstellar incident, she protested. I was using my extensive training and cultural knowledge to find common ground. If they start worshipping your kitchen appliances, That is entirely on you for your terrible explanation of thermodynamics to literal children, he grinned, unrepentant, and tugged her toward the couch, pulling her down beside him, closer than professional courtesy allowed, exactly as close as personal attachment demanded. Next week, he said, when we do this again. Because we are definitely doing this again. Maybe we skip inviting the Cubs and just make it us, proper date night. Just movie and popcorn and no diplomatic incidents. Kira settled against his side, her head finding the perfect spot on his shoulder, marveling at how quickly humans adapted to physical affection, how easily Marcus made space for her in his life and his arms. That sounds perfect, she agreed, though, knowing our luck, something will explode or someone will declare war, or Ambassador Kreth will need emergency mediation. Marcus pressed a kiss to the top of her head, casual and sweet and sending warmth cascading through her entire system. Then we'll handle it together, he said simply, like we always do. But afterwards, we'll have our movie night, deal? Deal, Kira agreed, and as she sat there in Marcus's arms, in his two small quarters on a diplomatic station at the edge of explored space, she thought about all the careful plans she'd made for her career, all the protocols she'd followed, all the emotional distance she'd maintained. And not one of those plans had included falling for an enthusiastic human who accidentally started religious movements with kitchen appliances and quoted Disney movies during peace negotiations. Not one of those plans had included feeling this happy, this terrified, this alive. Her communicator buzzed, probably Ambassador Kreth asking for a report on how the evening went with his Cubs. And Marcus's buzzed a moment later, probably station command was some minor crisis that needed attention. And they looked at each other and simultaneously agreed, without words, to ignore both for just a few more minutes, to steal this time for themselves, before returning to duty and protocol, and the galaxy's endless demands. Thank you, Kira said softly, not entirely sure what she was thanking him for the movie night, for the confession, for being exactly who he was, for making her want to be brave enough to want something for herself. Thank you, Marcus echoed, and she could hear the smile in his voice. For saving my popcorn machine from religious zealotry. For being amazing. For giving this a chance. For being you. Outside the viewport, stars wheeled in their eternal dance. Countless worlds spinning through the void, and somewhere on the station, 3 Kreshtar Cubs were probably already planning their next transformation ritual. But inside this small room, Kira Velnth let herself be still, let herself be happy, let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, the most complicated things were worth it. The communicators continued their insistent buzzing, duty calling them back to their roles as diplomat and liaison. But Kira found she didn't mind, because now there was an after, a promise of next week's movie night, a future that included terrible film choices and cultural misunderstandings, and Marcus's hand in hers. And as they finally, reluctantly, separated to check their messages and return to the work that had brought them together, Kira caught Marcus's eye across the room and saw her own feelings reflected back. Hope and joy and the sweet terror of new possibilities. Hey, Kira, Marcus called as she headed for the door, already composing her diplomatic report in her head. For the record, you glow brightest when you smile. I just wanted you to know that I noticed, that I've always noticed. She paused in the doorway, her heart full, her professional composure completely shattered. Her diplomatic training offering no protocol for this, no proper response to genuine affection freely given, so she simply smiled, letting her bioluminescence pulse bright and true, letting him see what she felt. The popcorn machine is not sacred, she said, and her voice was warm with affection and laughter. But what you said earlier, about transformation in service of community, I think you transformed me tonight, Marcus Webb. I think you have been transforming me for months. And I did not even realize until 3 predator cubs made a shrine in your kitchen. His expression went soft and wondering. And Kira knew she'd remember this moment forever. This perfect moment before the galaxy intruded again. Before duty called them to new crises and complications. Same, Kira, he said quietly, same. And with that perfect understanding, that acknowledgement of mutual transformation, Kira stepped out into the corridor, already counting the hours until their next shift together, until next week's movie night, until the next time she could let herself be not just a diplomat, but a person. Someone who loved popcorn and terrible movies, and most especially, the impossible. wonderful human who had accidentally started a religious movement and deliberately stolen her heart. And she found she wouldn't have it any other way, complications and all. Because some transformations were absolutely worth the chaos they created.